Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever.
surrender to the Lord this evening, this morning, whatever it is, say hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Come on. Times I failed, still your mercy remains. Should I stumble again, still I'm caught in your grace. Everlasting, your light will shine when all and praise become my embrace, to love you from the inside out, oh everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame, and the cry of my heart to bring your praise from the inside out of my soul, cries out from the inside out of my soul, cries out from the inside out of my soul, cries out to you.
Well, good morning, Tri-Cities Church. Thank you all for joining us online this morning. And also shout out to all of our followers all across the world. Wherever you're watching, you are a part of our Tri-Cities Church family. Well, listen, we're about to go into today's message, but I want you to do a few things. First of all, subscribe to this channel. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you're on our Facebook, make sure you hit that like button. And also make sure you share this service with someone else. Also, many of you know that on Wednesday, September 9th of this past week, our leadership team was made aware that someone that attended our live recording on last Sunday, the recording you'll see today, actually tested positive for COVID-19 on Wednesday. And so that person didn't show up to the recording with any symptoms, but later in the week started to feel sick and got a positive test. So what that means for us is that while we were intending to return to in-person worship Sunday, September the 20th, we decided as a leadership team that the best thing to do was to suspend that for a minimum of 3 weeks. So here's what that means, that we will not be going back to in-person services on September the 20th as planned. We're going to postpone that for at least 3 Sundays to make sure that everyone that was there is safe and healthy. And also make sure that we evaluate. Here's what you also need to know, that our safety protocols were in place and continue to be in place. Masks were being worn, social distancing was being practiced, but we know that the nature of this virus is highly unpredictable. The good news is that the individual is doing well so far, so continue to pray for them and their family. But that also means that we will pause on our plans to return to in-person worship. And so what you'll see over the next couple of weeks will be pre-recorded worship sets, although I will continue to preach from our series that we had already planned. So we're about to go into today's service. Today, we're starting a brand new series called The Good Life. So let's go to that message already in progress.
This book, The Good Life, is a study of the Beatitudes. Many of us, you grew up in church. If you didn't, that's cool. We're glad that you're here. But some of us who grew up in church, we heard about those phrases that Jesus talked about, blessed are this and blessed are these people, and we call them the Beatitudes, the attitudes that you should have when you are a Christ follower. And so it's sort of a study of the Sermon on the Mount, but the first section of the Sermon on the Mount are the Beatitudes. And so let's just jump right in. I want to read this to you because we're going to unpack each one week by week and really look at what it looks like to find true happiness. Listen to what Jesus says. I'm going to read from the New King James Version because I like how it reads. And then later on, I'm going to switch to the Message translation. Listen to Matthew chapter 5. This is verses 3 through 12. Not going to unpack all 12 today, but I just want you to hear it maybe as a refresher because some of us maybe have not heard this in a while. Listen to what Jesus says as he opens up his Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Verse 12, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Okay, Jesus, this is kind of backwards. I'm reading this sermon, one of his most famous sermons, and he opens up. I don't know about you, but I've been to school and I've done a lot of preaching. You probably heard more sermons than I preached, but I preached a lot of sermons in the last 20 years, and I went to school, and one of the things that I learned is when you open up a sermon, you always got to open it up by trying to hitch your wagon before you start pulling them along. You know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's ever toted anything or to have a trailer, you all know that you have to secure your load before you go on the journey. And so one of the ways that they taught us when I was in seminary to make sure that you secure your load is you open up the message with something that people can instantly connect to, something that people can feel, something. And so you notice a lot of times when I preach, I may start with a story, or I may start with something that I'm struggling with, and I can connect you. And Jesus obviously didn't go to seminary, because he opens up his sermonic selection. He opens up his sermon by saying some of the most backward stuff. Listen to what he says. Blessed are the poor. Wait a minute. That don't connect with me at all. I don't know about you, but I grew up on the song, I Want Money, Lots and Lots of Money. You know what I'm talking about, 40 and older. Come on now, just got paid. We grew up on songs that taught us that we don't want to be poor. Come on now. Anybody in the room, maybe at home, you kind of maybe grew up a little bit poor like me. Maybe some of us are poorer than others, but one of the things that you dreamed about when you grew up is a day when you had a little something more than what you have. And so I'm just trying to figure out what seminary, what preaching class did Jesus take, because he opens up his sermon and instantly I don't connect with nothing he's saying, because he says, blessed are poor people. Anybody in here grow up poor and you didn't feel blessed at all? Like, I'm not feeling you. Jesus, I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing that's a blessing about being poor. Jesus, you need to go back to school, go back to seminary, and learn how to hit your load, because before he even gets to the real meat of the sermon, he already lost me. Blessed are the poor. Okay, no, I'm not feeling you on that one, Jesus. And then he goes on to say, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek. It seems like everything that Jesus is teaching in the open part of his sermon, watch this, was contradictory, watch this, to the life that the people he was preaching to were living. So you mean to tell me, Jesus, you're preaching to thousands of poor people, and you have the audacity to call them blessed, when, let's be honest, the whole reason why they've been following you around is because they've been looking for bread. Then he says, blessed are those who mourn, and by imagination, I can assume that there's probably many of them, because they're poor, because socioeconomically they are disadvantaged. Many of them have probably lost loved ones to disease, have lost loved ones to all sorts of heinous things. And so he's saying that those of you who are mourning because you lost something, yeah, you're blessed too. And it's almost as though the whole list of things that he lists are backwards from the way that the world teaches. When is the last time somebody told you you are blessed because you don't got nothing? And so I'm wondering, who taught Jesus how to preach? Come on now, Jesus, you know that if you want, especially now in the 21st century, you got to make sure that you get people on board before you even start preaching. He opens it up with contradictory statements. Blessed are the poor. You ever found yourself chasing things that one day you finally caught up to, or somewhat caught up to, only to find out that it really had no value? Yeah. It's almost like chasing shadows. The author of this book, he talks about when he was younger how because he was poor, they didn't have a whole lot of toys. He grew up in San Antonio in the inner city, and they didn't have a lot of toys. And so one of the games he would play, he talks about in the book, is as a little kid, because he didn't have a whole lot, he learned how to make do. Anybody in here, like me, you grew up and you just knew how to make do? You knew how to, come on now, as Paul said, I know the secret of being poor and of being rich. And I'm telling God, look, I already know the secret of being poor. Can I learn the secret of, okay, y'all not feeling me. He said he grew up and he was so poor that one of the only games that he could play was a game called Chasing Your Shadow. Now, you know you sure enough poor when the only game you have to play is you've got to chase your own shadow. Then he goes on to say, I love this. He says, the problem with that game is that eventually you learn that it was impossible to catch it. And what started off as a fun pursuit of trying to catch something that seemed very elusive ended up in frustration because he realized that no matter how hard I try to chase this thing, I'm never going to catch it. Okay, I'm preaching already, because when Jesus says, blessed are the poor, he's letting us know that there are some things that we've been chasing in life that may seem to give us happiness, but at some point you're going to learn that even if you did catch that thing, that him, that her, that person, that salary, that job, even if you did catch it, chances are it's like chasing a shadow. Really doesn't provide you with everything that you think it should do. And so Jesus starts off his message by letting us know that I'm going to do things a little bit backwards. I'm going to teach you something against what the world teaches you. That's why this is a great series to share with your friends, because we're going to talk about something, especially during this pandemic, that feels to be all elusive. Yeah, because there are days where I'm okay. Can we just be honest? Let's tell the truth. And then there are days probably where I'm chasing happiness more often than not, especially in a pandemic, especially when you are not able to do what you normally do, especially when I've lost maybe some of the things that I've been able to do, maybe lost some wages, maybe lost some freedom. And it seems like over the last 4 or 5 months that the thing that has become more elusive than ever is to wake up and spend a whole day just being happy. That at some point, something, come on now, can I just tell the truth? At some point, something in the day or in the week is going to snatch away your happiness, and it feels like chasing shadows. This is a great time to talk about this, because in this pandemic, there's nothing that we need more than to learn what Jesus says about true happiness. Jesus starts off by saying, blessed are the poor. I just want to deal with that one today. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So I want to ask you this again. What have you been chasing? Maybe at the beginning of this year, you're like me, you had some goals that you were chasing. There's some things that you set out that you knew that if I just accomplish this in 2020, it's going to make me happy. There's some stuff. Maybe there's a level of income I'm trying to get to. Maybe if I'm in sales, I've been trying to sell this many cars or this many houses, or maybe I was trying to reach this number, or maybe, dare I say, I was looking forward to seeing our church grow numerically. I was chasing, come on, I'm not the only one who's chasing some stuff that you felt like, man, if we just hit this number, if we just hit that, if we just accomplish this, it'll make me happy. And then boom, all of a sudden in March, the bottom fell out of the year, and the thing that you were chasing started to look more and more like a shadow. And Jesus says, even when you don't have anything, he says you can still be happy. I love this because he helps us to understand that the road to happiness is not often the road that we've been traveling. And no greater time to talk about this than now, because some of us, we need something to stabilize our mood, because every day something's going to be snatched from our grip. There's going to be something that we're chasing that we just can't catch. And if we're not careful, we're going to allow that thing to drive whether or not we're happy. Jesus starts off with, blessed are the poor. See, in this context, the word blessed can literally mean happy. So he wasn't just saying that you'll get a blessing if you're poor. He's saying that people who are poor in spirit can be happy. He says blessed or happy. As a matter of fact, Dallas Willard, a great pastor and theologian, says that this word in Greek means the highest type of well-being possible for human beings. The highest type of well-being. Jesus says people who who know that they are spiritually poor can find a level of happiness that is at the height of what's possible of enjoyment at human life. Isn't that a contradiction that he says that the more you realize that you lack, the happier you can actually be? As a matter of fact, the highest height of human happiness comes, watch this, when you realize just how spiritually poor you are. That's kind of a contradiction. I'm trying to hang in there with you, Jesus, but when you start off by talking about being poor, I've been poor. I don't want to be poor. There's nothing blessed about being poor, but Jesus says, no. Happy people realize that they're spiritually poor. Dallas, let me say this again. It says the highest type of well-being possible for human beings is the type of blessedness that Jesus is talking about in this Sermon on the Mount. In other words, watch this. Jesus lets us know that the road to true happiness runs, watch this, straight through heaven. Did you catch what he said? He says, blessed or happy are those who are spiritually poor. Watch this, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There's something that you can attain that you cannot attain until you realize just how spiritually poor you are. There's something that you can gain when you have stuff. There's something that you can't gain when you have riches. There's something that you can't gain when you have it all. And Jesus says, for those of you who are poor in spirit, check this out. You can actually inherit the greatest kingdom that ever lived. I know you're in Roman oppression now, and it looks like they're great. And I know that we've been through oppression from Babylon and Persia and all these great kingdoms. But guess what? You can inherit the greatest kingdom that ever lived. And all it takes is for you to recognize, watch this, how much you need God. Blessed are the poor in spirit. In other words, if you're chasing that thing that you think is going to make you happy, understand that the road to true happiness runs straight through God's kingdom. Can I say this? There are many things that I want to accomplish in my life, a lot of stuff that I want to have, but I've lived long enough to know by now that there's some stuff that just can't fulfill me the way God can fulfill me. There's some stuff that just can't. Look, I've had a little bit, and I've got a little bit more money than I used to have. And every time I get to a certain level, I always find myself wanting more and more and more. And what I found out is that there's some things that I've been chasing that simply can't. Okay, some of y'all are not feeling me, so let me just go old school at home. Remember this in the Baptist church, they used to say, can't nobody do me like Jesus. I don't care how much you have, what you think you need. At some point, you're going to run into a complication. Nothing can satisfy your heart more than God. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit. The author, Durham Grace, says this in his book. He says, the deeper we immerse ourselves in Jesus and his kingdom, the more supernaturally sculpted into his image and the happier we will become. That's good right there. The more that I focus on Jesus and allowing him to shape me into the person that he wants me to be, to sculpt me into the person that he's always designed and called me to be. He says that's the happiest you will ever be in your life. I've learned, and I shared this with a pastor friend a couple of years ago, maybe about 2 years ago, right around the time I knew God was calling me away from where I was and calling me to Tri-Cities. And I said, I've learned at this stage in my ministry, watch this, to be happy in just being obedient to what God says. Some of y'all, I know that's not a good jump up, but come on now, that's good preaching. At some point, you've just got to learn to be happy when God's happy with you. And I've learned that sometimes we've got to anchor ourselves in the sheer joy of just being obedient to what God wants me to do. Because there's so many other things that you can chase, and you might catch it, but it will never fulfill your heart in the way that you think it will. Come on now, most of us, you know this, you have been chasing what I call the more monster. Yeah, the monster that tells you get more, have more, spend more, buy more, and more. And the problem is the more monster eats up all your margin. Have you noticed that? That as soon as you think you know where the line is, you get to the line and you can't figure out where the line is because the more monster has ate the line, and now you're chasing for more and more and more. And sometimes life feels like I'm running on a hamster wheel trying to get more, only to find out that can't nobody do me like Jesus. There's some stuff that's never going to fulfill me the way Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Yeah, the the blessed are the poor in spirit is a reference to what's called abject poverty, not object poverty, abject poverty. It means that it's the type of poverty, watch this, that is the most miserable, the most unfortunate, and the most humiliating type of poverty there is. Jesus went so far as to say, you're blessed not just because you are financially poor, and many of the people that he was teaching were financially poor. He says, no, I'm going to take it a step further. When you realize just how poor you are spiritually, yeah, it's one thing to not have money. It's a whole other thing to realize that you don't have it all together, that you're not as smart as you thought you were, that just because you got a little bit of education, you're not all that. He says, not only do you not have money, but you're blessed when you understand just how, watch this, how spiritually bankrupt you really are. That absent of God, you are nothing. He says, yeah, those types of people actually have the potential to live a much happier life than anyone else because they realize, watch this, that they have a need for Jesus. It's a trip when you get a little bit of money in your pocket, get a little bit of education. Come on, I'm not the only one. As my grandma used to say, this is deep. If you're not from the deep south, you're not going to know what this saying means. She used to say, you're smelling yourself. Okay, at home, you know what I'm talking about. If you grew up in South Georgia, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, some of y'all not feeling that. Let me give you another translation. It means you're getting too big for your britches, that you think you're all that. Jesus says the people who've been smelling themselves and the people who think that they're too big for their britches will never recognize that they need God. And until you recognize how much you need God, you will never be fulfilled. He says happy people realize how much they need God. So he's talking about an abject poverty. It's the most miserable, the most unfortunate, and the most humiliating in a good way. A type of poverty that humbles you enough to know that you need something that you cannot, watch, give yourself. He says, yeah, those people, if you watch them, they're happy. I love the Message translation of Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. It says this. Maybe this will bring it home for you. Message translation, Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. He says this. Eugene Peterson says this. I love this. He says, you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. Watch this. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. Man, that's so good. I want to read that again. I love how he broke it down. He says, you're blessed, or translation, you are happiest when you are at the end of your rope. I like to say it like this. When you're down to nothing, God is up to something. Sometimes you need to be down to absolutely nothing. No plan B, no better idea. You can't buy your way out of the situation. You can't connect your way. You can't find somebody who's going to hook you up. There's nothing you have left but God. Jesus says when you're at the end of your rope, when there's nothing left but you, God, and your prayer closet, when there's nothing left but you and God and your tears, that's when you'll find yourself the happiest you've ever been, because you wake up and you realize that I'm nothing without him. He says when you're at the end of your rope, when there is less of you, there is more of God and his rule. I don't know about you, but there are times in my life where I've found that there's too much me in this equation. Yeah, too much of my own opinions, my own thoughts, my own ideas, too much. Yeah, I know I'm pretty smart. You're pretty smart too. You haven't got to where you are because you're dumb. You know some stuff. But have you ever found a period of time of your life when you realize there's too much me and not enough God in this? Yeah, that's why I like how John the Baptist said. He says, I must decrease, so he must increase. In other words, John was getting a following, man. His church was popping. Everybody knew John. John, I don't know if you knew this, John had his own disciples before Jesus even showed up. And he says, you know what? As much as I have going on, as much as people are following me, and as big as my following is, I realize that in order for me to be the happiest I'll ever be, I've got to decrease so there can be more of him. And Jesus says that if you're going to be happy, you got to understand first that you are spiritually bankrupt. Many scholars believe this, that Jesus was among what was called the Anawim. That is, in those days, in first century, those were, even in the Old Testament, the Anawim were it literally meant the poor ones, also those who were called the bowed down ones. This was a disadvantaged group of people economically in their society, watch this, that they literally hung out at the temple because they literally, watch this, depended on God for everything. Come on now, you've seen this in the stories. You didn't know what it was called, but you remember the man by the gate, beautiful, who used to beg. You remember when Peter and John came in and it says, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give to you. Come on now, you remember, you've seen it all throughout the scriptures where people would stay by the temple and they would beg because those were the people who were so poor that they literally, watch me now, they literally from day to day to day, every day they woke up, they were in complete dependence on God's provision. There was no plan that they had for their life. They were so poor that all they did every day, day after day, minute after minute, hour after hour, was depend on God for everything that they needed. That's who Jesus says are happy people. Not because they have stuff, but because they learned the secret that you and I need to learn. Because, come on, let's be honest, in this pandemic, some of the stuff that you've acquired has been snatched away from you. And if my happiness was in that stuff, then as soon as it goes away, there goes my happiness. You know what Jesus says? He says, you know who the happy people are? The happy people are those who live every single day with nothing but utter dependence on God. Can you imagine this? The reason why they were at the temple, don't think of it in terms of maybe how like we see it now. These are people who went to the temple because they realized if God don't do it, it ain't going to get done. Every day that I wake up, I realize that it's not about how smart I am, how much money I have, how many hookups I have. It's all about me being utterly and hopelessly dependent on God. And Jesus says, if you want to be happy, learn to be like the Anawim. They were dependent on God and nothing else. And man, that just gives you a glimpse into the life that he says that will help you to understand how to be happy. They hung around the temple and they were characterized for having a deep longing, watch this, for the Messiah and for justice. Yeah, every day that they woke up, that's all they thought about. They had a deep longing for Jesus to come and a deep longing for God to bring justice. What would happen if the church took seriously the call to pray just about two things, just two? I know you got a lot of stuff that you need to pray for, but what if we were like the Anawim and we were so serious about the coming of God's kingdom that all we did is pray for Jesus to come and for God's justice to be done? See, they were so desperate, they couldn't depend on anybody else but God, and they were literally characterized as people who were so dependent that all day, all they did was pray for the coming of the Messiah and for God to bring justice. What would happen if the church wasn't so, I'm about to get myself in trouble, wasn't so concerned, watch this, of building up our little kingdoms on every little corner in our neighborhood, but what if the church realized that we are so spiritually bankrupt that all we can do is just ask God to bring justice into the world? He says that's the type of people who are happy. And because we live in the 21st century and we're capitalists and we love all of our stuff, we've forgotten that underneath it all, we are required by God to be utterly and hopelessly dependent on him. When is the last time you position yourself to really and honestly be dependent on God and not you? When is the last time when all you had was a plan A and it was God? Yeah, you didn't have a plan B. You weren't trying to figure it out. If God doesn't do it this way, I already got my plan of how I'm going to do it. Jesus says, you want to be happy, be utterly and hopelessly dependent on me and me alone. Only poor people knew that kind of happiness because they didn't have anything else to lean on. Blessed are the poor in spirit. See, part of the problem is, and I'm wrapping up, is that pride prevents us from true happiness. It's our pride in our ability to provide and our pride in our possessions that make it so difficult for us to be totally dependent on God. I'm proud of what I got. Come on now, we've taught us, this culture has taught us, be proud of what you got. Work hard and you'll make a lot of money. You can, come on now, you know all the things that we've been taught, and there's nothing wrong with working hard, but can we just say that we've been taught to be more prideful in our relationship with our stuff than we are in our relationship with God? Jesus says, it's no wonder why you're not happy. It's no wonder why you're miserable. It's no wonder why you're chasing your own shadow, because you have so much pride in your stuff and so much pride in your ability that you forgot that I'm the one who provides. You are worshiping the created instead of worshiping the creator. It's no wonder why you're not happy. You know who people are happy? People who have less stuff than you, because they're satisfied every day that God's going to take care of all of my needs. So I love what Paul tells 1 Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. He says this. He says, teach those who are rich in this world. Wait a minute, that's not me. I don't have to read that. Okay, let me just define that for you, because whether you realize it or not, you're rich. You live in one of the richest countries. It don't matter. I'm not making light of your situation, no matter how poor you are. Do you realize that if you live in a country that has a vast majority of the wealth in the entire world? Like we have, can I just tell you this? We have first world problems. Like the other day, the electricity went out and I had to manually open my garage. And here I am thinking about what a hassle that is, until it dawned on me, watch this, my car sleeps indoors. Okay, some of y'all just missed that. Here I am complaining about having to manually open a garage, until it hit me, some people don't even get to sleep inside. My car gets to sleep inside. So if you think you're not rich, Paul says, I'm talking to you. Teach those who are rich in this world, watch this, not to be proud and not to trust their money, watch this, which is so unreliable. Here's the thing, you already know that. I don't even have to tell you that. You know that because you've had some and then you didn't have some. There's a time where you had a little bit and then come on now, you already know money is unreliable. Money is disloyal. You know what I'm talking about. You can't trust money. It just goes wherever it wants. You ever found that you look at your checking account and realize your money been going all sorts of places that you didn't even tell it to go? Like, when did I spend that? And money is disloyal. Paul says, don't rely on money. It's disloyal. He says their trust should be in God, watch this, who richly gives us all we need, check this out, for our enjoyment. In other words, he says God will give you everything you need to be happy. So let me just end here, because you remember this story of the rich young ruler. Remember, he comes to Jesus and he says, Jesus, what do I got to do to get in? He says, he's trying to figure out, this whole, I'm loving what you're teaching, this whole eternal life stuff. I'm down with that. What do I have to do to get in? You remember Jesus told him, just follow the law. And he says, man, I've done that since I was young. And he probably wasn't lying. He probably was the type of person, many scholars believe he was a ruler, meaning he was one of the Pharisees. He probably followed all of the rules. He probably knew exactly what to do, and he probably wasn't exaggerating. He did everything that he was supposed to do. And then Jesus says, okay, I'll tell you what, you've done that. Here's the thing that's going to make you enter the kingdom. Remember, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom. He says, here's what you got to do. You want to inherit this kingdom? Sell all your stuff. And check this out. This is why sometimes I love when people trip out about Jesus and say, the church, all they want is your money. What Jesus says? He says, sell all your stuff and give it to the poor. He didn't even say give it to me. He says, sell all your stuff and give it to the poor. Then follow me. Check out what Mark says in Mark chapter 22. Mark chapter 10, verse 22, Message translation. After he says this, the man's face clouded over. Some versions say his face fell. It's like, dang. I was doing everything right, and here you go saying, blessed are the poor in spirit. He says, you got so much stuff that while you're saying with your lips you want me, I know that your stuff is going to get in the way, because you'll start depending on your stuff more than you'll start depending on the Savior. He says, if you want to really depend on me, if you really want this, position yourself to be poor. Mark says his face clouded over. This was the last thing he expected to hear. And he walked off with a heavy heart. He was holding on tight to a lot of things and not about to let go. Did you catch what Mark says? That he left away with not with a happy heart. What did he leave away with? With a heavy heart. Can I just tell you, in until we get to the place where we realize, and maybe for some of us we need to go back there to that time when you were desperately in need of God to do something in your life. He says, unless you constantly live in that space, you will never be happy. Because you'll always depend on everything except God. Happy, Jesus says, are the poor in spirit. Those who recognize that they are spiritually bankrupt and hopelessly and utterly dependent on God for all things in every season. Here's our challenge, because we've got so much stuff that it's hard to do that, isn't it? But Jesus is calling us to a place where if you want to be happy, position yourself to remember what it was like when you had nothing. And live there every single, I don't care how much stuff you have, don't let it pull you away from that point. Go back to the place. Remember when you were so desperate that you finally said, God, I surrender. You remember that day? Come on now, if you're a Christian, you remember that day when you finally got desperate enough to say, Jesus, I surrender. You are all I have. You are all that I need. What happened to that person? He says, don't let your stuff pull you away from that moment. You want to be happy? Live there. The place that drove you to God in the first place. If you stay there, pray this in Jesus' name, you'll stay happy. At home now, if you want to gather your family so we can take communion, for those who are in the room, we're going to take communion. And as Jesus broke the bread for them, this was a symbol of our abject poverty. That we're broken and humiliated because of our sin, and we need Jesus. Take and eat. And then when he poured the wine, it was symbolizing shed blood, this blood that would be shed for those of us on the cross who are utterly and hopelessly dependent. Here's what I want. As you take this, go back to the place in your mind and in your heart that drove you to Jesus in the first place. Take and drink. And as the worship team comes, I want you to, whether you're at home or in the room, just spend some time in worship, getting back to that place where you were when you first got on your knees and surrendered yourself to Jesus.
Yes, he knows my name.
All right, Tri-Cities. Well, thank you for joining us for this first week of The Good Life, learning about what it means to be truly happy, the kind of happiness only Jesus can provide. So I'm excited to continue this series next week. But before then, just want to go over a few quick announcements as we wrap up our time together. So you might have already seen this in the newsletter. By the way, newsletter comes out every Thursday. Make sure you're receiving that. Lamar also shot a video about this and put it on our app. So make sure you're staying connected through all these different mediums. But you may have heard, just out of a full abundance of caution, we have decided to go fully virtual for the next 3 weeks. So Lamar will be continuing to record these sermons, but we're going to not meet together and open up phase 2. We're actually going to wait until sometime later. So we're going to revisit this in October. More information to come, of course. But in the meantime, we are going to stay strong as a church community. If you remember, TCC Strong was the theme for this year. And boy, do we need to be flexing this muscle of strength. So a lot of ways we can stay strong as a community. Wednesday mornings, of course, at 8 o'clock, we get to meet with Lamar. We get to meet as a community. Women's ministry still happening Wednesday nights. We have high school, middle school, small groups happening virtually as well. So make sure that you guys are staying plugged in and connected. And really exciting, so September 20th, that was going to be phase 2. But instead, since we are still meeting virtually, we're going to do a virtual bingo party at 4 o'clock. All right, so more information to come. You'll get an email about that. But it's just a chance to hang out as a church community together and have some fun. So anyways, guys, hope you're having a great time connecting virtually, and we will see you next week.
Thank